This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
The goal is to try to get this recorded and uploaded by Friday night. Can't make any promises, but I'm definitely going to give it the old college try. I just have to grind the recording out tonight and see how everything goes. For those that did not tune into the Monday show, I mentioned this briefly in passing, but I'm going away this weekend, so I'm a little behind schedule with trying to piece everything together for this coming Monday's podcast. Right now, the plan is to review the Crown Jewel show that WWE is hosting on Saturday. We'll also have to squeeze in the Retro Raw and NXT reports somewhere in there, but I just need to find the time to sit down and actually watch those shows. But Friday availability is going to get cut down due to travel. So, because of the time constraints I'm working with, I'm going to skip over all the small talk and the intros here and dive right into the retro reviews. Short and sweet. Welcome to the show. The FSWR podcast is on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday. Subscribe, comment, like, share, don't. Whatever floats your boat. Just make sure you do me a favor in the algorithms and come back to check out the show and give it a click. It'll help me track better in the analytics. So with that, on to Crockett TV. And we're about, 4 weeks out from Starrcade by this point? It's funny because even with having what's practically a fully booked card, factoring in all the prelim matches as well, of course, during the actual cold open with David and Tony, they spend no time addressing Starrcade and are firmly focused on advertising the 17th War Games match in the year 1987 alone. Now, last week, I could have sworn it was Long Island they were plugging for the next War Games house show match. Now apparently they're also doing one in Cleveland. God. I take back everything I ever said about Tony Khan killing match stipulations. Now we'll get to the Starrcade update later on, but other than that, it's kind of the status quo when it comes to the studio wrestling for the week. They open up with Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus the Gladiators. Hayes was rocking the Surfer Sting-inspired blue tights and yellow boots for the occasion. All he needed was the face paint to complete the look. But, everyone was really ramped up for this one, including the announcers. I'm wondering if it was a fresher set of tapings for the new audience, because the energy in the room for this match was very high. People were bouncing off the walls here. And the match wasn't anything remarkable. Pretty basic stuff. It is still fascinating when I go back and see Garvin and Hayes working tag matches together in 1987, well before Garvin was ever recognized as a Freebird member. It wasn't even something that ever came up in passing during their promos. Honorary Freebird member Jimmy Garvin. It was just, Garvin doesn't really have anything going on right now. Gordy and Roberts are off doing their own thing. Hayes is still around. So fuck it. Put them in a tag team together. We'll see where it goes. At the time, they probably thought nothing of it. By 89, it was a totally different story. But Hayes ended up going over with the Running Bulldog, which was a lead-in to their ringside promo with David. pretty much just to plug the six-man tag at Starrcade with Garvin, Hayes, and Sting versus Gilbert, Steiner, and Zbyszko. Garvin has a bad case of Starrcade fever. I was expecting Will Ferrell to run in with a cowbell and start going ham. But, it didn't happen. Hayes said some stuff, and about 3/4 of the way through the promo, guess what happened? You guessed it. My Peacock app started glitching out. It was doing the thing again where the timeline would skip ahead like 2 minutes, and it got way out of sync with the audio feed. So I had to play around with that shit for like 5 minutes to try to get everything back in sync together. I think I've cracked the code. Normally, all I have to do is skip ahead to the next infomercial spot, and it usually fixes itself. It's still fucking annoying, and I continue to assert that Peacock is the worst streaming service in the history of humanity. But what can you do, you know? Aside from complaining, which I'm very good at. So then we had Ricky Santana versus Larry Stevens in the most boring TV squash of all time. This is like that Jim Neidhart match on Retro Raw we just talked about. It was a 3-minute match. It felt like it went 90. Santana was literally laying on the mat with Stevens in a stationary hammerlock for like 80% of it, to the point where even the studio crowd was actually getting behind Larry Stevens. And finally, at the point we see Stevens actually start throwing shots at Ricky to make a comeback, Ricky just fires back with a forearm, and he wins with a flying body press, almost completely overshooting him, which David Crockett mentioned on commentary. But of course, all that was just fluff material to set up the big announcement at the Starrcade Control Center. And we talked about a few of the big marquee matches for the card. Got Flair and Garvin in the cage for the world title. You got Dusty and Luger in the cage for the U.S. title. Career versus title, to be more specific. You got the Midnights in the Rock and Roll in the scaffold match. But up until this point, we still didn't really know the status of the World Tag Team Champions, Tully and Arn. Now, we had heard rumors that the Road Warriors wanted a title shot, but nothing had been officially announced. So as we cut to the truck, where Tony's sitting alongside Jim Crockett, Tully and Arn, we cut to another pre-tape with Sandy Scott, and he's running down the contract terms with J.J. Dillon and Paul Ellering. That's always a funny visual in wrestling, when they cut to an already pre-taped sit-down to a completely separate pre-taped sit-down in the same segment. It's a bit of a mindfuck if you start getting too deep in the weeds thinking about it. But I've talked about it before. When it comes to the Horseman promos or segments, especially with Tully and Arn, you're either going to get playful, gives no fucks attitude Tully and Arn, or you're getting super buttoned down, super serious Tully and Arn. And they were dressed in suits for the occasion here, so you knew they meant all business. Now, as for the actual pre-tape with the managers, I don't want to gloss over that. Pretty cut and dry. Ellering vowed that history would be made on this night in the Road Warriors' backyard of Chicago. And boy, he was not kidding. But JJ did not stir the pot here, surprisingly. Whereas when it came to the Dusty Luger match, he was going out of his way to try to manipulate the contract and get everything to work more in his favor. He did not do that with this Tully Arn versus Road Warriors match. He said, well, it was bound to happen eventually. And just like Paul Ellering said, it'll be a great match. I was like, JJ was suitably chastened on this night. Now, he wasn't going to try to pull something here with Hawk and Animal. He remembers what happened the last time he tried to pick a fight with the Legion of Doom. It did not go well. He got dropped on his shoulder and put in an arm cast for weeks. I think JJ learned his lesson. But even Tully and Arn kept it very straight. They said even though they're going in with the crowd working against them, doesn't matter whose backyard or whose hometown they're in, the Road Warriors are not completely unstoppable. They can be beat. They're 280 pounds apiece. And Arn and Tully are going to prove that the Road Warriors are not unbeatable. You know, it was one of those Horseman moments where they understood the gravity of the situation they were in. And if there was ever a time to be super stern, super serious, this was it. Going up against their gravest threat yet. I love this segment. Really great stuff. If only I didn't know what the end result was, I could probably be more optimistic about the upcoming payoff. Unfortunately, when the payoff is they killed Chicago, it paints an entirely different picture in history. So then we cut back to the ring for Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch versus Tommy Angel. Definitely been a minute since we've seen the egg-sucking dog on the Superstation. Now, last time he was in a prominent TV spot, I'm pretty sure it was when he turned heel on Dusty and then dropped Nikita on the concrete floor with a brainbuster. Then he was suspended in kayfabe and we never saw him again. He was banished to the UWF. But I don't think we were supposed to know about that. The only thing I can say about this match was, sucks to be Tommy Angel. They sent this poor man out there to die this week. Murdoch just beat the ever-loving shit out of this guy. Threw him into the interview podium. Totally destroyed that. Just dumped this guy around from pillar to post. Finally put him away with a brainbuster. I did note, during the various tuning in and out of commentary I did, I believe I overheard the announcers refer to Dusty's career match as a 90-day extended vacation, which is essentially what it would have been. I think I even joked about that on last week's review. Just funny how even David and Tony figured that out. They're like, well, technically if Dusty loses, his career's not over. He just basically gets to sit on his ass for 3 months and then come back after he's had time to heal. Really wouldn't have been that bad of a gig. Back to Murdoch, though. He more or less squawked a bunch of redneck slang. It was by far the highlight of the entire show. Standing there gassing himself out while spit's flying out of his mouth. I believe I heard him refer to Nikita as a communist at one point, which is not the first time we would hear somebody refer to the Russians as communists on this show, but it was a rather unique insult. I wish someone would put together a compilation of Raging Dick Murdoch promos. God love him. This man's a treasure when he's pissed off. Especially once he gets all southern and starts breaking out the redneck terminology. You have no idea what he's saying half the time. But goddamn is it funny. And of course, as Tony's standing there just as confused as everybody else, we then pitch back to the ring for Ivan Koloff and the Warlord versus Rocky King and Dave Isley. With David Crockett's favorite talent on the show, Puddinhead, Paul Jones. It's actually getting sillier by the week. Now David is purposefully lengthening the word head for dramatic effect. Puddinhead. Now, of course, it's the standard Warlord Koloff squash. They take turns beating up the job guys in very slow plotting fashion. Warlord for the second week in a row now, dumping a job guy on the floor and nearly killing him. And then finally going over with the sickle backbreaker combo. I did note, Warlord was safer this time with depositing the guy onto his shoulder instead of recklessly dropping the guy on his head. But You know, points for effort. Staying on the subject of pudding head, that segment was followed with Mighty Wilbur versus Cougar Jay, with David Crockett delivering the line of the week. Can you imagine him as a great picker? You know, now that you mention it, David, no, I cannot. I believe I also heard a heckler in the crowd inform Wilbur that he needs to use Clearasil. A unique observation. I didn't see any visible face acne, but maybe this fan knew more about the Mighty Wilbur than I was led to believe. Now, of course, Wilbur went over with the running splash in about 60 seconds. Really nothing to say about it. Nor was there much to say about his promo. It was horrible. Horribly funny. Well, first, he confused the difference between Paul Jones and Ivan Koloff. Then he had a real hard time saying that he wants to meet Ivan in the ring for a fight so he can wrap a chain around his neck. And if Paul tries to interfere, he'll rip his nose off like an avocado. And Wilbur was so proud of this avocado line, he then turned to David and started cackling. And he said, "What do you think of that?" And David kind of chuckled, and he very quickly pitched a break, as if to say, "Please turn the cameras off." Fantastic train wreck segment. You know, got to admit, I was not too hot on the Mighty Wilbur when he first showed up. I'm slowly warming up to him. He's becoming my second guilty pleasure on this show. Right behind Paul Jones. He's wonderfully horrible at everything he does. I have no clue where the fuck any of this goes or what the payoff is. But so far, I'm very much intrigued with great picker, vineyard owner, man-child Mighty Wilbur. He's much more preferable to Vladimir Petrov. I can tell you that much. So then we come back from break for a JJ Luger Matsuda promo. It was more so a JJ Luger promo. Matsuda was just kind of hanging in the backdrop, not doing much. But pretty simple segment. JJ said if Dusty somehow survives the powerhouse that is Lex Luger, Hiro Matsuda will be waiting in the wings to finish the job. And then Luger did a promo, trying to tear down the idea that Dusty is some kind of living legend. He also put over Matsuda as a man that's been trained to inflict pain on the human body since he was 24 inches tall. He said he spent most of his days eating ginseng and drinking the finest of all wines. And, well, I don't remember if I misheard this or if it was just my brain naturally going there for rather disconcerting reasons. I'm pretty sure I heard Luger tell everybody to chain their women to the bedpost because it's going to be a party night in Chi-Town for Ric Flair when he becomes the new World Heavyweight Champion. And that is when I officially determined this segment very unsettling and disturbing. Thankfully, they got away from it before it had time to fester. That took us to Mike Rotunda versus Thunderfoot number 2, which was mostly uneventful except for the studio fans chanting "airplane spin" in the most southern delivery of all time. At which point, as Rotunda hoisted up Thunderfoot onto his shoulders and began to spin him, the fans all unanimously went, "Yay!" They were quite pleased to see this man spin a grown man on his shoulders. I was also pleased with Jim Cornette's tennis racket this week. Going above and beyond for the Halloween holiday season, a double-sided racket with a jack-o'-lantern on one side and on the other, a black cat on a white picket fence. Also delivering a classic line to David Crockett, the one night of the year where he can go out in public and feel accepted. At which point, we pitch back to the ring for the Midnight Squash with Ed Franks and Alan Martin. Very disappointed to see Bobby and Stan not rocking the Halloween colors this week. They should have been wearing red and purple to match Corny's suit. I'm ashamed. Well, at least I was for all of 8 seconds until I saw the greatest spot of all time. This is one of those legendary TV moments that you watch back on replay until the end of time, and it's never not funny. Like, this one's up there with Sid breaking his leg on a WCW pay-per-view and having to lay there motionless in the ring for like 15 minutes while guys are bumping around and fumbling all around him. Bobby goes to whip Martin off the ropes, and I have no idea what the fuck they were attempting here. If Bobby had one idea for a spot, but Stan just didn't have it scouted, or if Martin was just so incompetent, he got completely lost and forgot what he was supposed to do. But here's what happens. Martin gets whipped off the ropes, and Bobby goes to do the duck under spot so Martin can leapfrog him. At which point, I believe Stan was supposed to catch him with a thrust kick. Again, this was probably the intent. It did not go according to plan. As this Alan Martin fellow leaps over Bobby, he undershoots Stan by about 15 feet. He sort of glides into Stan's boot. Stan gets maybe a quarter of an inch off the ground with the toe of his boot before Martin totally eats shit on the mat. And Stan, ever the professional, completely stops. He then looks down at Martin's dead body. He observes the situation. He sighs. He rolls his eyes. And then he just keeps wrestling. I cannot tell you how many times I went back and watched this on replay, mainly for Stan's reaction. Like, you could tell he was so pissed, but at the same time, he's like, well, nothing we can do about it now. Gotta keep going. That's what happens when you put me in the ring with dipshits with 2 left feet. What do you think's gonna happen? I screen capped this on my computer so I can rewatch it over and over again. It's the greatest 10-second clip of anything in Crockett Promotions in 1987. The 3-way miscommunication spot with Bobby, Stan, and Alan. Never forget it. And Stan giving Martin the world's lightest super kick because he realized there was no way in hell he was hitting that spot. Just totally gave up trying. Of course, at that point, Stan just wrestled the rest of the match like he had a chip on his shoulder. We had Cornette threatening to shove his racket down David Crockett's throat, to which David, not even trying to hide it, just breaks out laughing. And eventually the Midnights won with the double goozle. But it was one of those bumps where I don't think it was Martin here. I think it was Franks. He doesn't just take a flat back bump off the finish. He sort of leans backward and then falls into a heap as Bobby goes flying over him. Comically terrible. But, well, it was all mostly a setup for Corny's post-match promo, so he could plug the big scaffold showdown. Now in this, they showed some Sunday syndicated footage of the Rock and Roll Express dressed under hoods in an effort to target the Midnights. Kind of out of the playbook of Magnum and Dusty when they masqueraded around as the James Gang during the summer of last year. It was like totally obvious Ricky and Robert are under the hoods, but we're all supposed to pretend like they're not. We're supposed to be in on the joke. Oh. Jim knew what was going on. And it's hilarious here because Cornette is trying to cut this really serious heel promo, essentially vowing death and humiliation on the Rock and Roll Express. Meanwhile, the entire time he's talking, Bobby is holding up Corny's tennis racket right in front of Tony Schiavone's face. Tony is desperately trying to keep a straight face the entire time. Spoiler, it did not work. He totally broke down laughing. But it's such an oxymoronic situation where Corny's trying to be really serious, and there's Bobby holding up this fucking pumpkin tennis racket. I'm just sitting there shaking my head. I'm like, what is going on? And he did all but say, Starrcade 87 will be the night that rock and roll dies. And yes, he did say, die. Sounds like a vague threat, if you ask me. I don't know if you're allowed to say that on television. Promising to commit manslaughter. I mean, I get it was partial metaphor, but I think any rational person could put two and two together there and realize what was going on. Some tells me they would not get away with that in 2023, but perhaps that is me just speculating. In any case, we come back from break for a Nikita Dusty promo. Nikita's talking about Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor, saying that his unification title match at Starrcade is no longer about the NWA versus the UWF. It's about proving who the better athlete is, who the superior wrestler is. Oh, by the way, yes, you heard me right. Nikita just has his TV belt back now. I have no idea when or how he obtained it, but yeah, he somehow regained possession of it off camera. And then Dusty reviewed some recent footage of Matsuda attacking him with powder during a sanctioned house show match. And while Dusty was blinded by the substance, Matsuda is in there putting him in nerve holds. I believe Dusty referred to it as Matsuda applying the nerve hold to the $1 million arm. Just to let you know he was wealthy. And of course, they got all the ringside shenanigans going on. Johnny Weaver ends up putting JJ in the sleeper hole, but Luger ends up blindsiding him. And Luger hits the ring to attack Dusty so the heels can gang up on him. And when they cut back to the studio, who should Dusty then turn his attention to but Dick Murdoch? Completely changing the subject, saying he knows him all too well, and he doesn't think Murdoch knows how to handle the pressure that comes with facing Dusty one-on-one. He says that no two men alive are capable of taking down the superpowers. At which point, this is where I noted, Dusty has now been feuding with Dick Murdoch for the entirety of 1987. I don't believe we've ever seen them have one match together. It's been a lot of promos, a lot of trash talking, maybe an angle or two here and there. That's about it. Talk about dragging your feet through the mud. And from there, we go back to the ring for a new breed squash with Rob Idol and Rick Ryder. Chris Champion's hair gets more ridiculous as the weeks go by. He is now sporting purple hair with a buzz-cut mullet. Looks fucking absurd. The match was hideous, as most new breed squashes are. I still have no idea whether or not these guys are supposed to be baby faces or heels. I guess it just kind of depends on the week and whether or not the studio crowd is into them. Sean Royal put one of the jobbers in that fake sharpshooter hold toward the end, at which point the New Breed hit their wacky double-team body press brainbuster combo, and David Crockett immediately started plugging advertisements for Gucci. That's all I got. Chris Champion's hair, terribly dull match, New Breed over with a bad double-team combo. Then we come back for Ricky Morton versus Joe Lynn, with Ricky receiving golf claps as he entered the studio this week. Not sure where Robert Gibson was. The funny thing is, he's not the one currently selling a shoulder injury. Ricky Morton is the one with a taped up shoulder. By all logic, shouldn't Robert be the one working singles matches to allow his partner to heal up? Not that Ricky's really selling much of anything at this point. I mean, he's still taped up, but he's mostly back to working normal matches. And he went over Lynn with the small package here. And from there, we came back for Eddie Gilbert versus Tony Suber. Again, Gilbert no longer has possession of the stolen U.S. title. So I was able to confirm that Nikita was the rightful champion. I could stop confusing myself. Really nothing to say about it. I did like Gilbert doing a clean break in the corner and then smiling for the camera by saying, "That's my Mighty Wilbur impersonation." I did notice the 50-50 crowd split with Gilbert this week, which is very amusing. At the same time most of the women were chanting hot stuff, there were also a bunch of men in the crowd chanting, "You stink, Gilbert." Which is a great insult, by the way. Not, "You suck," or "You're a piece of shit," or "Go home, Gilbert." No, they chanted, "You stink." So Gilbert won with the hotshot stun gun. And here's everything I wrote down about the following Kevin Sullivan promo. He said a bunch of stuff about Jim Cornette. I have no idea what. I did not track any of the dialogue. I have officially claimed this the moment where I tapped out on Kevin Sullivan promos. Not joking. It's the exact same thing with the New Breed. Is he a face? Is he a heel? What the fuck is he talking about half the time? I have no clue. But I have totally stopped trying to figure it out. Last week he was putting over Dusty. This week he was semi-putting over Cornette. There's no consistency with it. Makes no sense. So as I waited for him to collect his thoughts, I mentally checked back in with this Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard versus Rex King Keith Steinborn match. Another case of Tully and Arn being all business. They beat the shit out of Steinborn for most of the match, double-teamed him and worked over the arm. They sort of botched a middle rope axe handle spot where Tully had Steinborn draped over his knee, sort of lost his grip and then stumbled over as Double A was coming down. But they recovered, and a minute later, they won with the double gourd buster. From there, immediately cutting over to the podium for a Ric Flair style and profile promo. He actually covered a wide range of topics here, not exclusive to women, partying, and fucking, or some combination of those three subjects. He put over how great it would be if Dusty were to leave the territory for 90 days. It would make Flair joyful, gleeful to see this man humiliated. He joked about Ron Garvin riding around in his pickup truck with fat broads. Then he talked about the Chicago girls and all the fun the Horsemen were going to have after they win their Starrcade matches. There will be much drinking, partying, and sleeping around. Hopefully not involving handcuffs like Luger was alluding to earlier. Unless we all know they're in on it, and it's all good fun. And even so, I still might question their motives. But that all culminated with the main event. With approximately 45 seconds left of airtime, Terry Taylor defended the UWF TV title against Kurt Thompson. He hit about 17 moves in a row and then won with the figure four. At which point, in his post-match promo, Taylor referred to Nikita as a, quote, red communist several times. He compared his legs to piano wires, promised the punishment would be slow and painful. And I honestly don't remember what Gilbert said, but I did note that he had on some wacky rave shades. The hell did he get those? If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought he was getting ready to go to the rave after the taping was over. Either that or some workout session to sweating to the oldies. Overall, though, it's kind of the running theme for the last several Crockett shows. The last 20 minutes are a real trudge to get through a lot of the time. I just get so burnt out by that point in the program. Still not a bad episode. I mean, they basically got the majority of the card for Starrcade announced. Now it's more about hyping the big angles and setting up the important matches as they're pre-planning over the next 4 weeks. You know, at this point in the game, they're not going to take any risks. We're not going to really see any major angles, so I think a lot of the build now is mostly down to the promo work, which is all right. It's not going to make for the most exciting environment on the TBS shows, but they're doing all the right things to move the needle forward. Keep that Starrcade hype feel special. We'll see how it stacks up in the record books when we go back and talk about it in a few weeks. I've seen and read a lot of mixed bag reviews about Starrcade 87, so we'll see where my opinion lies on the spectrum. For now, why don't we move on and talk about this iconic episode of Mid-South from October 30th, 1982. A date that we will remember until the end of time. Been looking forward to talking about this one for a while. The anticipation for the Mid-South Tag Title Showdown. And as we heard at the end of last week's program, the initial plan was to have this match kickstart the episode. If by some off chance it happened to go longer, they wanted to give it ample enough screen time so we would get an actual finish. But there's a couple wrinkles being thrown in. In addition to the title match, the Louisiana State Fair is also in town for the week. So there's an extra patch of kids hanging out around the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport. So, of course, as is always the case when you got a bunch of kids in a room at a given time, you got to entertain them somehow. So, when in doubt, why not a gorilla? Keep that in the back of your head for a later time. Now, we did get Bill Watts and Houston promoter Paul Bosch at the venue to talk about the incident that went down earlier in the day. While the match was initially scheduled to be Hacksaw Duggan and Ted DiBiase versus JYD and Mr. Olympia, Duggan ended up getting into a bit of a pickle with law enforcement. So much so that he was detained. So DiBiase took it upon himself, because he's such a forgiving man, he decided to fly in one of his friends from Portland to take Hacksaw's place in that tag match, because by God, the show must go on. And who should DiBiase's partner be? None other than good old Matt Bourne. the future Doink the Clown of WWF fame from 93 until about early 94. Now, again, that's a lot of information to take in all at once, so just to recap here. According to Ted, Hacksaw Duggan was arrested due to an incident that happened earlier in the day. He did not specify what that problem was, but regardless, Duggan won making the show. However, Matt Bourne was going to fly in from Portland to take Duggan's place in that title match, with the stipulation still being intact. Loser of the fall must leave Mid-South for 60 days. You know the drill. In addition to that, the state fair is also going on. So while the kids are having a ball in time, you've got a giant man in a gorilla costume hanging out in the backdrop. Totally there just for show. Absolutely nothing out of the ordinary there. I need to break out that SpongeBob clip if I can find it in the archives somewhere. So with that frame being set, don't forget any of that information as we move on with the show and actually talk about that match later on. First, we have to talk about the footage they aired of the six-man tag with JYD, Mil Mascaras, and Andre the Giant versus Killer Khan, Gino Hernandez, and Tully Blanchard. Jesus H. Christ. The star power in that match alone. And one of those names is not like the others. Andre, Dog, Gino, Tully, Mascaras, Killer Khan. It's like giving someone a chocolate cake for their birthday and saying, well, we're out of icing, kid. So here's some mustard to top it off. Give it some extra flavor. Fucking Killer Khan, dude. The bane of my existence in these retro archives. He's everywhere. We just can't escape his horrific bouts. Now again, this took place at the Sam Houston Coliseum. This was not a Mid-South film. The videotape was very blurry. It was also considerably purple. Looked like someone left the night vision filter on during the editing process. But by the time the feed started rolling, they were well into the heat portion of the match. They were working over Andre, of all people. And while the heels were trying to isolate him, they ended up breaking down into a giant brawl at the end. It was just sort of endless pandemonium until they do a spot where Tully tries to throw Mascaras out over the top to the floor, but Andre actually reaches out from the floor and he shoves Mascaras back over the top rope so that he could fall on top of Tully Blanchard and pin him. Only the 7'4" Andre the Giant could pull off a spot like that. It was definitely unique. You don't see too many finishes like that in wrestling anymore. Come to think of it, AEW ought to try something like that with that Satnam Singh guy. I mean, he's probably the only tall dude they have on that roster that could actually pull that off. Whenever someone goes to dump Jay Lethal out to the floor, Satnam can just reach out and pick him out of the air to throw him back over the top rope so Jay could fall on top of the guy and pin him. It'd be the most memorable win Jay Lethal's had in AEW. Anyway, I'm venting. After that, we also had Kamala going over Ted Allen in what I coined the most pointless squash of all time. I also miswrote Ted Allen as Tim Allen. Didn't even think twice about it. I just now realized that. There was also false advertisement on their part, because again, they told us the tag title match was going on first. Meanwhile, they threw this in there to fill up time. I don't even know why. I presume because they needed something to finish off that six-man tag coverage. So they're like, yeah, we got 60 seconds of airtime. Throw a Kamala squash in there. But then we come to the Mid-South Tag Title Showdown. God, there's so much to unpack in all this. I honestly don't even know where the best place is to start. I already sort of outlined the pre-match story ahead of the match airing, so we've already addressed that. I mean, I've seen this match on replay so many times over the years, just because it's so iconic and memorable. And even as I go back and see it again, it hit me watching it just how much I forgot about it. All those little subtle, small things that you just don't pick up on. The finish notwithstanding, I mean, that finish alone, you see it once, you never forget it. But here's what I decided to do. Because I love this match so much, I decided to watch it in its entirety. I didn't really get carried away with the note-taking. I just wanted to rewatch this as a casual fan and relive the moment in real time. And I'll go ahead and spoil it now. The match did not last the remainder of the program, as Bill Watts was insinuating it might. However, it was so genius the way this is all laid out. And I think a lot of the conversation really starts with the involvement of Matt Bourne. Because of the stipulation where the loser of the fall has to leave Mid-South, I think the average ordinary person watching would think, well, you know, they flew in Matt as a part of the match to be a substitute for the heels, so he's obviously there to be the fall guy, right? Well, it's not a totally crazy thought. So when you see the actual finish and everything that went down, when it wasn't Matt Bourne eating the pinfall at the end, it becomes that much more of a shocking finish. Now, yes, you're always going to have the smart fan in me come out whenever we're talking about no disqualification tag matches. And I'm sitting there asking the entire time, why the fuck is everybody standing on the apron when they can just freely enter and exit the ring as they choose? They're not going to get punished for it. Frankly, I don't understand it. I've never understood it. It's why I'm adamantly against no DQ tag anything in wrestling, especially if the official is actually going to try and enforce tag rules. Like, it never makes any sense, and for sake of time, I'm just going to try to overlook all that and see the match for what it was. Now, they also let this run through a commercial break, so we had basically what you would call a standard layout for a lot of tag team settings in wrestling. It's all baby faces in control early on. Dog and Olympia are wrestling DiBiase and Bourne to the ground, hitting him with all kinds of offense. The heels end up retreating to the floor to try to stall for time. We end up seeing the heels cut off Olympia and work him over for a while. Of course, during many various points in the match, you got guys illegally breaking up pin attempts, like switching partners behind Alfred Neely's back. And again, this wasn't just exclusive to the heels. The babyface team was also doing this. But again, it's no DQ, so he can't do anything. It is funny hearing Bill Watts say, illegal breakups on pin attempts would normally be grounds for disqualification. Goes to show just how far the business has fallen. Most boys today wouldn't even think twice about it. And we all watch modern wrestling to some extent. Am I wrong? Everyone just sort of comes and goes as they please. Most of the time, the refs are just standing there jacking themselves off. Have you seen a Lucha Brothers match? I rest my case. Of course, WWE is not exempt from the conversation because I see it there too. But the critical moment in this match is everything that led up to the finish, so why don't we go ahead and break down the details of what happened. So Olympia is getting worked over, and Dog's becoming desperate because he sees that Olympia doesn't have much fight left in him at this point. So he actually goes into the ring to break up a pin attempt, ends up dragging Olympia over to his corner so he can tag him in and start making the comeback. By the way, fans were totally into this. This cheating mechanism that JYD used to save his own partner. Nah, they didn't care. They were totally fine with it. And while Dog's in there trying to fend off DiBiase and Duggan, DiBiase's actually over in the corner trying to load up the gimmick glove. Fans are all pointing this out to give Dog the warning sign. So while Dog is wrestling with DiBiase on the mat, trying to steal the gimmick away from him, from literally out of the void, in one of the most legendary Bill Watts quotes of all time, I remember this one like the back of my hand. "What's that gorilla doing?" And if you'll recall from our previous conversation, remember that gorilla line I told you to keep on the back burner? Turns out this was no ordinary gorilla. It was indeed Hacksaw Dugan. He pulled the wool over all of our eyes. Here comes Hacksaw to body slam Mr. Olympia on the concrete. And while DiBiase's dealing with JYD, here comes Duggan to hit Dog with the running spear. And just to put the nail in the coffin, DiBiase gives Dog the loaded glove shot, leaves him flat on his back. As he goes for the cover, it's 1, it's 2, it's 3. And just like that, down goes the Dog. Not only do we have new Mid-South Tag Team Champions in the upset of a lifetime, JYD is now forced to leave Mid-South for 60 days. And it's that no good stinking Jim Duggan's fault. He was the gorilla in disguise. And he would have gotten away with it too. Now again, if you're well familiar with your Mid-South footage, you probably have seen this before. It is one of the more legendary Mid-South moments in their company history. There's a lot that went into this. And after building it up for several weeks on TV, highlighting and showcasing the importance of the stakes, I think it's fair to say it was a very satisfying payoff. Left the fans up in arms because the top babyface had to leave the territory for 2 months. But, did he really leave? Stay tuned. Now again, they still had about 20 minutes left of airtime by this point, so there was more stuff to come. All of it paled in comparison to the title match. Not to undersell everything immediately. So we'll try to blister through some of the other stuff and not harp on it for too long, because there really wasn't much to say about the bulk of the material on the card. Poor Bill Watts. Totally gruff after calling that title match. He barely had a voice. And he's totally heartbroken over everything involving the Dog. I mean, he pretty much said in this match that he was going to have to step out and let Paul Bosch take his place after it was over. He got so much on his mind. I did laugh to myself when he said, "Things used to be so simple when I was wrestling. You never used to see cheap tactics like that." To which I said, "Just you wait, Bill. If you thought that kind of overbooking was ridiculous, just wait another 10 years, brother." Sure enough, by the time 92 or 93 rolled around, Bill Watts was pretty much all but out of the wrestling business on a full-time basis. So the next match is Tony Atlas and Grappler 2, which was just a showcase squash for Atlas. He won with an overhead military press, which I also noted is something you don't see too much in wrestling anymore. Guys winning with overhead press slams. In the year 1982, that was a valid finish. In 2022, most fans wouldn't even bat an eyelash at seeing a spot like that. Not unless the guy was pressing him up in the air a few times and then backflipping off the top rope while holding him up in the air. Again, to echo Bill Watts, it used to be so simple. So then we had Gino Hernandez versus Jesse Barr. And we all know about Gino's ring style after reviewing all those world-class shows. He was definitely a lot less animated here as compared to his Dallas work a few years later. Still a natural heel in the ring, though. By the way, this is where Paul Boesch jumped in on the headset. All but basically telling us, the audience, got to admit, I'm not much of a commentator, but hopefully I'll suffice for a taping while Bill Watts is off sulking over the dog being gone for 2 months. Not to make light of the situation or anything. Really, though, for a Gino squash, there was not anything remarkable to report on. Nothing very stand-out-ish about it. He was not hamming it up for the camera. It was just sort of a generic heel match where he went over with the top rope elbow. Didn't even do anything dastardly or underhanded. No trash talking to the fans. I was like, come on, Gino. Work your magic. You know how to be a prick on camera. Now, he was definitely toned down a lot here. Maybe he was timid. He was working for Bill Watts. Maybe he just didn't want to be too flamboyant. You know what I'm saying? Well, he definitely wasn't hamming it up like Duggan DiBiase and Matt Bourne were. Paul Boesch trying to demean and admonish them for their actions in that Mid-South tag title match. Telling DiBiase, quote, "Your monkeys lost your head," as he passes off Duggan's gorilla mask to DiBiase, to which DiBiase retorts, and I quote, "I think the other monkey lost his head." Careful there, Ted. Fine line. I know we're in the South, but still, that is a touchy subject, to say the least. But this was basically the Rat Pack's chance to affirm that they've got all the gold, boasting about getting Dog out of Mid-South for a couple months, and they're just happy to see a well-thought plan come to fruition. It was all part of the master plan, and now they get to boast about it for the next couple months while everybody else gets to look on with frump face. Kind of like Marty Lundy's frump face in this match with Mr. Wrestling 2. Poor Arn working his way through the meat grinder here. A mere simple job guy in the year 1982. What you would call a puppy with big paws. He wasn't AA quite yet, but it did not take him long to come into his own. God, his selling and his bumping were already on point by this stage in his career. Obviously, though, a Wrestling 2 showcase. AA got a little bit of shine early on, but it was mostly a one-sided squash. Wrestling 2 over with the running knee lift. Bosch's commentary was less than stellar, but again, noting the quiet part out loud. I'm not a commentator, so don't judge me. I'm free-forming it right now. Luckily, we only needed to get through a few more minutes here, leading into our final standby match, Hiro Matsuda and Yoshiatsu versus Vinny Romeo and Tim Horner. Bringing in the Japanese heels to beat a pair of Mid-South job guys with approximately 3 minutes left of airtime. Again, we're talking about Matsuda on these Crockett shows in the lead up to Starrcade 87. The whole involvement in the Dusty Luger U.S. title feud. It's interesting when you go back and see all the cross-references from different territories, even going back several years prior. By far, the highlight of Bosch's commentary on the entire show, right at the very end of the match, as Vinny tries to make the comeback, he's firing away on the Japs. Bosch chimes in by going, "Here comes Vinny Romeo. fresh, ready, and willing to set the Japanese. And then he just kind of trickled off mid-thought and did not finish. Riveting. Very riveting commentary. And as quickly as the heels fought back and won, Boyd Pierce was there to immediately pitch to the show closing credits. Paul was trying to continue his thought afterwards, and Boyd immediately interjects and goes, Hiro Matsuda and Yoshiatsu with the victory. Folks, we're out of time. See you next week. Fuck you, Paul Bosch. Goodbye. I was crying with laughter. Boyd fucking Pierce, of all people, the guy that literally gained the reputation in Mid-South for sitting there quiet for most of the matches, even he was like, all right, this commentary is putting people into a coma. Let's get away from it as quickly as possible and go home while the people are still alive and breathing. Again, all joking aside, when you look back at the card, it was a total one-match show, and that's fine. You know, they basically built it up as such. Only one thing of substance mattered. And again, boy, did it have a substantial payoff. And we now know the central theme for a lot of the Mid-South shows going forward. We have some new development in the main event scene. JYD's out of the picture for a while. Matt Bourne is now an official member of Duggan and DiBiase's Rat Pack. New Mid-South Tag Team Champions. And Bill Watts is very sad. As we all are. It's going to be a bummer. And not having the dog on Mid-South for a few months. How will the show go on? Surely his presence must be felt somehow. But it's a great show. Even when you think back and how little they accomplished on the program overall, discount that one tag match. Just that one match alone, though, there was a lot that happened. And boy, did they pay it off. And it moved the story forward. Because this is only one part of the chapter. And there's plenty more involving that whole title picture that we'll see unfold on TV in weeks and months to come. Multi-layered storytelling. Long-term storytelling. Done the right way. Right, Tony? Right. Well, you never know with these world-class shows. Sometimes you get those unexpected guests that pop up every now and then. Just when you think, you know, I could go for a change in the top guys on the card. A lot of familiar faces, but I could go for a change of pace, you know what I mean? Well, who should show up? None other than Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. The Fantastics have arrived in Dallas. I know they were bound to show up relatively soon. Now, of course, we talked about it last week. This is the first set of tapings for the Cotton Bowl. They taped back in late October. Also, I believe the first of the annual Cotton Bowl events, they ran up until, I guess it would have been 88. Was the last one they ran. I did not look into attendance figures for this show. I think seating capacity for the Cotton Bowl Stadium was something like 80,000. Mind the ballpark. It's probably a little more than that. I'm probably underselling it. They didn't really mention a whole lot about the Cotton Bowl on TV. Discount some passing mentions from Bill Mercer on commentary. Now, we knew about the six-man with the Von Erichs, Jake Roberts, Gino Hernandez, and Chris Adams. What we did not know about were some of the last-minute card changes regarding that match. But we'll talk about that when we end up discussing it. You know, again, they had a lot of matches booked, too. I think it was like, 9 or 10 matches altogether? don't have the wiki pulled up in front of me at the moment. We'll see if they even air every single match. I highly doubt it. The prelims look fairly underwhelming. I think Kerry and Mike ended up pulling double duty on this card. But, now let's go ahead and run down what we got for this show. We'll also go ahead and skip Ralph Poley's hideous rendition of God Bless America. My ears could not handle the unexceptional musicianship. It was just hideous enough to bring a tear to a glass eye. We'll just leave it at that. We'll also not spend too much time harping on the first prelim match, the Missing Link versus George Weingroff. It was fucking atrocious. Link did about 75 headbutts in a row, and then one with a diving headbutt to the back of Weingroff's neck. It was basically a blind headbutt, which Weingroff had no way of protecting himself. So I don't even know why the fuck Link tried it. Especially to a man that was partially blind. Absolute waste of 4 minutes. What wasn't a waste, however, was the Fantastics versus Kelly Kiniski and El Diablo for the regional NWA Tag Team Championships. Of course, the Fantastics are sporting navy blue trunks for the occasion. So, what color is Kelly Kiniski, the adversary, wearing? Navy blue trunks. The exact same shade. I hope they find him. All seriousness, this ended up being a really enjoyable match, and the crowd electricity definitely helped. It was very noticeable, the upper deck and outer sections of the venue being totally empty. Like, there was no way to even hide that on camera. But even so, whatever number they packed in for the attendance, 10,000, 11,000, looked great. Hot crowd for the entirety of the taping. It was all very formulaic stuff when it comes to tag action. The Fantastics were massively popular as babyfaces, so that helped. They got their flurry of offense in during the early stages. Heels ended up working over Rogers for the heat portion, so Fulton could make the hot tag later on. Kiniski and Diablo are actually a pretty good heel unit, all things considered. They definitely got the whole chemistry of using the illegal moves behind the ref's back. Trying to use each other for leverage when they could. I did laugh. There was one epically terrible spot here that was so awful it was funny. Rogers goes to whip Kiniski off the ropes for a dropkick spot. Kiniski, I'm pretty sure, was supposed to bump for it, but he ended up stumbling towards Rogers very awkwardly, which then caused Rogers to completely whiff the dropkick. So Rogers barely catches the guy with the toe of his boot, and it was so horrifically fucked up. Rogers ends up trying to sell it like Kiniski moved, but then Kiniski ended up falling over anyway and selling it. I was like, what the hell was supposed to happen there? Someone clearly blew a spot. My inclination is to blame Kiniski, but well, even the Fantastics had their off days. So maybe it was Tommy. I don't know. And the match did kind of fall apart at the end when Bobby was making the comeback. The heels were very poorly feeding for him as he was throwing punches in the corner. And my final note reads, cameraman catches full shot of Tommy Rogers' asshole as he comes off the top rope for the splash. And upon further review, I remembered exactly what the camera shot was, and I was not exaggerating. Tommy Rogers went up for a diving splash, but the cameraman was on the apron filming it. So when Tommy sprung up to the top rope, the only thing we see in the camera shot is Tommy Rogers' asshole. It was the ass plus the hole. The hole of the ass, as Broken Matt Hardy once coined. So that was pretty epic. But again, the Fantastics are great babyfaces in peril. That can never be understated. Whether it's Bobby or Tommy selling, they were always the perfect underdog unit. Super fiery babyface team. Everything they did looked great here. Minus that dropkick spot. Couple shaky things toward the end, but again, very fun match with a hot crowd. Can't ask for much more. And we'll be seeing plenty more Fantastics matches on Dallas TV in months to come, so we at least have that to look forward to. We also had more of the Fantastics in this little video feature after the break. They showed some of the babyfaces hanging out at the State Fair earlier in the day, playing some of the Carney games. We had the Iceman and David Manning riding on roller coaster rides, playing pool. Fuck, I didn't know the Iceman was a billiards guy. He was really good. It was awesome, too, because they show him and Manning picking prizes afterwards, and the Iceman's just racking up all these stuffed animals as they go from shot to shot. You know, they're greeting fans in the process. By the end of this video, the Iceman had like 6 or 7 different stuffed animals. All different. You know, same deal with Bobby and Tommy. Of course, they were decked out in their signature tuxedos. Because of course they were. It's probably 98 degrees in the middle of all this. There's Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton in the middle of hot Texas afternoon, wearing full tuxedos. But you know, I was thinking about it while this video was playing. Yeah, there was an element of hokiness to it. But you know what? It wasn't over the top goofy. It wasn't overtly silly. It was just a bunch of wrestlers playing fair games and having a good time. Greeting fans. But like, at the same time, they weren't making a mockery of it. They weren't play acting. It wasn't a total circus. They were still being adults. You know, just think like, you see something like this in AEW, guaranteed it would be twice the level of ridiculousness. There'd be 8 gazillion camera cuts. Everyone would be delivering horribly rehearsed dialogue. It'd be overprocessed and overproduced to death. Like, I just think, even if modern wrestling companies did stuff like this, I could at least buy it to a certain degree. Especially if there's fan interaction going on. At least you're indicating to the people that these guys are stars. Because again, that's the whole point of it, right? That's why you have the baby faces out doing stuff like this. You know people are going to be out and about. They'll know who these guys are. So, you know, you have them do it as a publicity stunt to get the company traction. But you also let them have a good time and do the kinds of things baby faces in wrestling are supposed to do. No one's being silly. No one's exposing the product. Yeah, seeing the Iceman walk around with a giant stuffed purple dog is kind of bizarre. But he still looks like a grown adult. He's still shaking hands and taking photos with the kids. You know, so it works. It works better with him doing it than the fucking Elite. The fucking job order and the Beta Bucks doing company publicity like this. Someone would have called the authorities. But with that, we come to our TV main event. In an angle that was previously taped on this show, but we have not seen air yet. There was a mixed tag belt with Kevin and Stella versus Chris Adams and Lady Giant. And apparently they shot an injury angle with Kevin, which prevented him from being able to compete in this match. So in to replace him, none other than Bobby Fulton. We're seeing plenty of the Fantastics on this show, aren't we? Now, I imagine this wasn't taped back-to-back from that Fantastics match we saw just minutes prior. But pulling double duty like that must have been a tough challenge. Especially in the middle of Texas heat. So the match is now Bobby, Kerry, and Mike versus Gino, Jake, and Chris. And again, they've been building to some combination of this blow-off for a while. And obviously with the worked angle involving Kevin, it kind of throws a monkey wrench into the works now. This is definitely a longer match, but it was also great because, much like the majority of world-class main events we see, there's never any downtime in matches like this. Even during the heat portions, it's fast-paced and moves. The crowd energy is high for the entire length of it. I did like hearing Mercer refer to Jake the Snake as, quote, tall and angular. Not exactly the description I was expecting from him. I don't think it's common to hear somebody be referred to as angular. I would consider that an insult in most cases. But, they kind of had a central theme going on here. Mostly all centering around Chris's involvement. Chris is actually really good at taunting Kerry here. Anytime Kerry would tag in, Chris was very methodical to make sure he was conveniently tagging back out to the ring apron. Then he would stand there and trash talk Kerry, waiting for the ample moment to strike so he could work over Kerry when he was vulnerable. Again, everybody worked hard. The action was steady and very enjoyable. Honestly, the only thing that sucked about it was anything Mike did. There was a spot where he was rubbing Chris's face into the middle rope at one point. It was so phony looking, even Chris couldn't pretend to sell it like it hurt. He also gave Kerry the coldest tag I've ever seen. Right before the big brawl, too. They did the old switcheroo heat spot when Jake ran interference behind David Manning's back. So when Bobby tried to come in, only to get held back by David because he didn't see the tag, the heels would keep isolating Mike for another minute. But once everybody got in there, Kerry went to give Jake the vertical suplex, but Chris snuck in from the back door and caught him with the super kick, which allowed for Jake to get the pin on Kerry, which I thought was very surprising. It actually got a stunned silent reaction from the crowd, which I did not expect. People were so alarmed to see Kerry be the fall guy here. I think it actually legitimately shocked people. I kind of assumed with Bobby being in there, he would have been the one to eat the pin. But no, they went with Kerry instead. The last of the baby faces I expected to do the job. And of course, you get that visual of Chris out on the floor afterwards, holding up the belt and being all proud of himself. It was a good close to the show. As was the post-match interview pre-tape in the locker room, where the heels get to boast about their title win one last time. Mercer's there trying to rain on their parade, but the heels are not having any of it. By this point, Gino is sporting quite literally all the gold. He's got the Texas heavyweight title, the American heavyweight title, and now 1/3 of the six-man titles. It's quite the accomplishment. But it was a great way to go out this week. Awesome first set of tapings. We'll just neglect that missing link squash that may or may have not existed. Definitely one of the more fun episodes we reviewed in a while, though. Get out of the Sportatorium for a change. Nice change of pace with the Cotton Bowl Stadium event. Packed crowd. Great card book for night one. This definitely had those Texas Stadium vibes from back in May in terms of hot, exciting environments. And we're only looking at the first week. We'll probably have at least 2 or 3 more shows like this to fill out whatever they air from the initial set of tapings. Even if we don't see all the prelim matches, that's fine. I do expect we'll see that mixed tag match next week, whatever that ends up being. But, I honestly don't know what to expect there. Between Stella Mae French and the Lady Giant. Yeah, there's one thing I learned about Baby Doll during her Crockett run in 85 and 86. She was not what you would consider a great worker. Not by any stretch. Ask Jim Cornette if you don't believe me. Will she stiff Stella? like she did to Cornette during the 86 American Bash Tour. Tune in and find out. And you can also tune in to the Monday show to check out our next upcoming FSWR podcast. Again, I'm hoping I get this edited and recorded and uploaded by the end of Friday night. If not, it'll definitely be Saturday morning at the latest. But yeah, we'll reconvene on Monday when we do the Crown Jewel recap, as well as the Classic Retro Raw and NXT reviews. So it'll still be a packed Monday show, but we just won't review SmackDown. So thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate everybody that comes out to check the show out each week. And take care. Peace out.